And just sketch out a little bit the sort of the nature of the sexual culture that we're living in, and why you think it ultimately favours male sexuality actually ultimately more than female sexuality.
So a premise that I start with, which is a very controversial premise in feminist land, but is probably less so in the rest of the world, is that men and women are fundamentally different in some very important ways. And some of those differences are physical, and some of those differences are psychological. And the psychological differences are average ones, and there are outliers, but they are nevertheless real, and they're important at the population level. So, for instance, men are higher in a term that psychologists call sociosexuality, which is one's desire for sexual variety, essentially, a drive towards having
multiple partners,
casual
novelty,
sex, and so on. Exactly.
Yeah.
And there is overlap, but in terms of the whole population of men and women, men are further towards the unrestricted end of the sociosexuality spectrum, which no one, I think, should be surprised to hear, because that obviously should sort of hold true in our experience of the world. But it's just very, very difficult to say in progressive circles where the blank slate doctrine dominates. But I start with that controversial premise, and from there I say, okay, well, what we've seen post-sexual revolution has been a rejection of Christian sexual ethics and an embrace of freedom per se as the ultimate good. And the popular progressive narrative around the sexual revolution is that you shake free of these old oppressive norms, you inject more freedom into the system, and expect people to arrive at more harmonious sexual relationships. I don't think that's what we've seen at all. I think that what we have essentially seen is that the women have been encouraged, not by conspiracy generally, but by a new kind of culture, a new kind of incentive structure, to imitate male sexuality, to imitate that more unrestricted sociosexuality.
The sort of Sex in the City type,
yes.
Jessica Parker sort of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
So hookups, so watching porn, so experimenting with fetishes, all these things which suit the interests of people who are naturally more sexually adventurous, but don't, I think, suit the interests of the vast majority of women who are not naturally that way inclined, but are encouraged, I think, to see that as aspirational.
Because it's purportedly a liberating kind of form of sexuality. That's
exactly, and the only reason that you wouldn't want to do those things is because you still had hang-ups, right, derived from the old traditions. So
you've sort of noticed this, and the book, as I say, comes to, in a sense, some surprisingly traditional conclusions in that sense, essentially saying by the end chapter, well, perhaps we need to reconsider going back to what we had before the sexual revolution, the idea of monogamous marriage. I mean, that's a pretty stark kind of conclusion to reach. How's that been received by people,
a lot of my critics
by your
agree.
peers?
Yes, so a common view among feminist friends and colleagues who've read the book is they love it right up until the last chapter where I make the case for monogamous marriage. But I mean, what I try to do in that chapter, it is the controversial chapter, is to make that argument in entirely secular terms and to use as much data as
well, I think that's what I really
possible.
Appreciate about the book is you're not writing it from a quote-unquote Christian perspective. It's very much about the data and about the culture and obviously the experiences that you've encountered as well among women. For early access to shows and for bonus content, register now at thebigconversation.show.